Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session recording 177. My name is Dani Beaumont and I am a product manager on the Adobe Muse team. You have the lovely opportunity of watching me on video. I'm going to try this as part of the new tool. I am joined today from the Muse team by a fellow by the name of Paul, who is one of our engineers. He's one of the coders on the team, and Jason, who is one of our test engineers. They're going to help us out with chat. As I mentioned, this is a new tool for all of us. I think it's pretty terrific. The most important part for me is I know that many people that were listening to the audio over Adobe Connect had trouble with the quality of the sound. So I think both the streaming video and the sound quality will be much richer. The other is that I don't need to run a separate recording tool just to record the content to put up on YouTube. That'll be pretty instantaneous, so it helps me out an awful lot. Good to know we have a Muse Master in the crowd. That's always important. I might have to give over control if things don't go well, so stay tuned if you're one of our Muse Masters. Let me see. I'm going to go ahead and switch over. In general, there is a Q&A pod that you should be able to see in your control panel, in essence. If you have questions, the folks that are watching Q&A for us will keep an eye on that. Roughly speaking, if you have a question for me, go ahead and put it in the Q&A pod. Paul and Jason, if you want to answer some of those questions, if that's appropriate, you can go ahead and do it. If it's something that I should address, you can leave it as an open question in the Q&A. And if it's specific to what I'm showing, I'll pop over and take a look at what's there as we proceed. Chat is chat. You're welcome to chat with each other. It's good to stay a little bit on task, but keep in mind that this session is a jam session. The reason why we call it that, see the quotes, jam session, is because we learn from you and you learn from us. So this is your opportunity to let us know what's going on with you with the tool. Any areas that we can help you. It can be very much off topic. That's totally fine. And you can put that in the chat as you go along. It just helps us learn about what's going on for you. If you're not part of a private pre-release program, I encourage you to go there. Let's see if I can put that in the chat real quick. Actually, maybe Paul, do me a favor and just put the URL for our private pre-release there in chat. It's museprerelease.com. And it's a space where you agree to not tell our secrets until we're ready to talk about it publicly. But the private beta is a terrific place to express your opinions about features under development, understand what our thinking is behind those features, and just help affect the future of Muse. So we encourage you to join there if you would like. I'm going to take a look at chat. So Paul's saying he can't type in the Q&A window. See, this is going to be a little troubleshooting. All right, good. Valerie can. Paul, are you not able to type in the question and answer section? Are you still having trouble? Okay. You can type. Okay. So I think everyone is good. So throw it into the Q&A or throw it into chat. And with that said, I'm going to close out our current poll. And I can share the results for those of you that are really interested. Honestly, the banjos did win. I did not share those results initially, but believe me, I'm not lying. Every time I ask about the banjos, they win. They haven't lost yet. I should probably come up with another metaphor for our jam sessions, but can only handle so much technology change at one time. So what I'm going to do is start by showing you some of the resources that are available to you if you are new to Muse. So muse.adobe.com is kind of a playground for the Muse team. We manage it directly. The landing page is built by our interaction designers. As we're building out a new feature, we on the team try to be the first to test and see if it meets our expectations. And the landing page that we delivered on June 20 when we shipped Responsive Muse reflects that responsive Muse interaction feature set in action. So the landing page is great for that. The events page is a great way to see everything that's going on in the community. I did a webinar last week and then this jam session that's happening as well. Facebook always keeps track of what's going on as well, so you can go to Facebook and sign up for these sessions. The tutorials area tends to have really good content where there's deep dives around particular topics. We have some sample assets and such. And of course, Site of the Day is just a great place to see, for example, some of the responsive designs that have come in from the community since we started shipping responsive back in February. So with some of that said, let's go ahead and talk about the wireframing workflow. And this needs a little bit of a preamble. The idea is that if you as a designer are building out a website, interestingly enough, the web starts to be a world where interaction of content and data becomes really important. You're not building a brochure that someone folds out, a trifold brochure that they fold out in a certain sequence. You're not building packaging. You're building an actual interface. And even if you were trained as a visual designer, you're in the business of interaction visual design. That's part of your job as a web designer. And really understanding how elements should be interactive, letting users know where they can click, where they can get more information, how the organization of information is handled. So for example, if I just go to this page and click on my navigation there on the left, it takes me down to the footer where I have persistent navigation for the page. How that is built should be tested as you're looking at sites that are more and more complex. As a designer, they talk about the idea of just the process of prototyping. And very early on, when you're interacting with yourself or your colleagues or your client, you really want to test how much information needs to be communicated in the site, where the information is stored. Now, I have an old site. Let's see if I can get there here as I say this. Katie's. Let's try this. So Katie's Cafe wireframe. I think I can pull up, maybe not. My good friend Katie still lives on. I don't like that one. Let's just step back for a minute. So the idea is that wireframing is almost, or prototyping is almost like a slider of information. And depending on who you're talking to, whether it's yourself, your colleagues, or your clients, and the information you're trying to test or measure will determine how you flesh out that content. Now, when people first started working with Muse, they were used to what I would suggest is kind of an old way of working. And that was where they would use something like Photoshop and build out a comp, so a prototype of a website that was built directly in Photoshop, and it would show the way the landing page might look, the way other pages might appear, and they would put that Photoshop comp in front of the client and say to the client, well, here's how things are going to happen. Here's how you'll interact with it. As we've evolved, the idea of starting in Photoshop for a website seems a little bit archaic. And if you did come from the world of print, it's almost as though you're saying you're going to do a magazine spread for a magazine, and you're going to start that layout for the magazine in Photoshop. You probably, if you've dealt with print in the past, would ordinarily start in something like InDesign. Decide how many pages you'd have on the site. Decide what the hero or the main area would look like. Decide the length of your captions, your section heads, things of that sort in InDesign, and then maybe jump out to Illustrator or Photoshop to fine-tune some of the elements in that design. And the mental metaphor with Muse is very much the same. As you are planning out your site, you begin in the application. Let's go ahead and open up Muse. What do you think? Not a bad idea. And as you're working, you want to start from scratch that file new behavior with some of the decisions that you'll want to make around that design structure. So here I am in Muse, and I'm going to pull down on File to a new site. And I can come in and decide, is that site going to be static or fixed in width, or is it going to be fluid or responsive? The default behavior with the new version of Muse is a fluid width site. When I click OK, I'm taken into one of 4 workspace layouts, the plan mode. And this is where I start to plan out my site in a very wireframe-like way. So as you're working, you may decide your site structure. You're going to have a home page. You might have a products page. You might also have an About Us. And you might have a contact page. Many, many sites have these elements. Now, around your products, you might have product A and product B, let's say. What I'm able to do here is organize that information. I may want the About Us page to appear in my navigation to the right of my site design. I can change my mind by just dragging pages around and reorganizing them in the site structure. So I'm already able to iterate with very little consequence around the effort of my engineering work. If we go back to this idea of wireframing, I think it's interesting to think about what the best tool is in your process as you're working. So I kind of did an experiment. I don't, as many of you know, I'm a career product manager. I don't really do a lot of work for clients. I have some that allows me to walk the walk and test the features, but I don't do it very much. And part of me was curious about this idea of paper sketches and wireframing out work. And there's a nice article here. I'm going to come grab this article, see if I can pop this into chat really quickly. So this is just a nice article that talks about the paper prototyping process and some different examples of wireframe sketches. And as you look through the designs, you can see some of what's being effectively communicated. I can tell at a glance a logo will go here. Right now as the viewer, I'm not obsessed about the colors of the logo, the size of the logo. I get the sense that this will be a video, that this is a two-column structure, that there would be a tabbed panel. So knowing enough about the web, as a viewer of this wireframe, I'm getting some good information. I can see what the sizing is for certain content. And it goes pretty far. I can start to have callouts, for example, that do define what each of the elements on a sketch would be. And as I progress here, there starts to be more and more information. But there really does come a time where looking at a paper sketch, if I go all the way back up to the top, I can't interact with this video. I can't see what happens if I click on a tab and jump to another page. The other thing I would suggest around wireframing and planning for the web is that complexity has grown exponentially when you introduce the idea of responsive design. In that world, you have to consciously say, when I add a viewer, a video viewer, when I add a tabbed panel, if I'm going to design breakpoints for different classes of devices, let's say just desktop, tablet devices, and smartphones. For each of those layouts, I need to consciously think to myself, even at a sketch mode, this looks good for a desktop layout. If I were on a tablet, chances are I could trim the width of my design down to the tablet layout. And then for a phone layout, I would probably go single column and weave together content from this left and right column into a single tall column design for a mobile device. I need to be thinking about that all the way from the sketch place. Now, in order to kind of experiment a little bit, I was working on the old Katie's Cafe prototype, and I literally went into one of our rooms where we had a whiteboard, and I just whiteboarded out some of the wireframing elements just to see how far I could get here. And you'll notice I've got my landing page, there's logo, I've got X's indicating photos, and as you click through, or as you roll through in this case, you can see some of the variances in the design. Here's the gallery page where I have photos, I have a menu at the bottom of the page. To be honest, I got incredibly frustrated with this process because sure, I can take photos on a whiteboard, but showing interactivity, showing the differences in the layout, it's very difficult at a glance for you to see what I'm asking you or what I'm defining here. I can see I've got an accordion design, sure, that makes sense. I know that I've got a menu, but I've got to guess about how I might interact with such a design like this. So what I would suggest is, first off, can't say it enough, whether it's a napkin or a whiteboard or a piece of paper or Adobe Muse, you need to really think through all of the elements in your design and all of its structure, both on desktop all the way down to smartphone. before you begin working in the Muse application. When you have that idea in mind, there are wireframing features within Muse that I want to show you today that can be pretty fun and exciting to work with. So kind of having set the stage there a little bit, let's go over into Muse. And I've got a basic design here, and I know where I'm headed. Muse has some ability to theme out content that is both text, images, and interactive components like widgets. We give you the ability to theme those pieces out pretty well, but it's a little tricky. So I want to show you some of the tips and tricks for being able to do that. Let's start with an example of a finished design from a real Muse user out in the real world. Let's see. Let me go ahead and load this guy up. To me, this is such an amazing example of the sophistication that can be required for a complex prototyping site. So I have a client, his name is Aaron Lawrence, and he works at a company called Pivotal Labs. And Pivotal Labs is a development environment. But in the last 5-6 years, they've hired a huge amount of interaction designers, and they acquired a mobile development company. And their whole intent is for a client, let's say RAM, these RAM Finder folks, to sit with a visual designer and a developer for up to 6 months, interacting and building out the user experience for their design and validating it with actual customers before the coders start coding up that work. And the reason for that is it is so early on in your ideation process. When you're at a sketch level, when you're at a wireframe level, it's so much easier to make changes without affecting a huge amount of cost and consequence. And the more you can give your client a sense of how an exact user experience should be, the better off you'll be in the long term of your site. So if I come into one of these pages and open them up, they are very wireframe in their structure. So they've got a distinct set of text and images. I'm going to go ahead and move some of these panels out of the way real quickly here, close out my assets. So I've got a number of components. One thing you'll tell right up front that I couldn't communicate necessarily with sketches unless I pulled out a colored pencil is where are the points of interaction that I want the consumer, the viewer of this site, to consider. If I come in and preview this page in the browser, so I'll pull that on File to Preview Site in Browser, Muse is going to render the wireframe for me as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, so actually render it in the browser. Now, as I mentioned, you'll see when we start interacting with this, it's a pretty complicated prototype. It's amazing that this was really built simply for the purpose of testing and working with clients before giving it out to a development team. So you'll notice here that I can roll over each of these items. I can click in to view details. I can print out a list, so there's a call to action there. I can see how many. You'll notice I also only brought up one page to play things safely here, but I can interact with each of these elements because they're built within Muse. Now let's take a quick look at the finished site for a minute. RAM select. I don't know if we happen to have anybody in from Australia that joins this call, but there's an amazing amount of detail that comes into selecting your herd of sheep in Australia. So this is the finished design. The developers, in all honesty, have gone in and extended it beyond that initial prototype of a few years back to add more functionality, but it's pretty much roughly intact. If I decide I want to come in and find some RAMs, I can make a query, and this is a live data query. I can come in and look at weighted data, again, on the back end. Who knew that getting yourself some animals for your flock was this complicated? So I can come in and determine how much do I care about the wool quality and then render a query to come back. I can look at how they're rated. I can click in on any one of these to determine who the heck knows what that's about. But this is a pretty sophisticated system, and prototyping it out in Muse is incredibly valuable. It was to the team for them to understand all of the controls, all of the details that needed to be communicated to their clients before they coded up the site. So I'm going to stop for a minute. I'm going to take a look at the questions. The next step is going to be to go ahead and start to work with wireframing elements and skinning and style those elements. We do have a question about, will Muse ever have a CRM integration system? You know, I have a personal opinion about that. The professional opinion is it's possible that we will deeply integrate a CMS. My personal opinion is that it's not the best use of our team's time, and I'll tell you why I think that's true. There's a mantra that I learned in visual design, and it's a mantra that should generally be true probably in the world of customer service, but the client is always right, which means that if I approach a small business owner and they have an established blog, or they have an established CMS that they use for inventorying their products, the customer is always right. I cannot necessarily dictate that they adopt my CMS or my blogging engine. It's much better if the tools I use can adapt to whatever tool that client is using. And if we totally jump out here for a second, and I go to muse.adobe.com, and I jump into the widget directory here, and I just type in, for example, blogs, let's say, what's happened is our community of widget developers, the third parties that work closely with us, have gone in and created connections to many, many blogging engines that are out there. So whether it's Tumblr or a custom blog, there's a lot of choices there. If I want an e-commerce solution, let's say, so I want to sell products on my store within my Muse application, there are a number of winning e-commerce solutions that are out there. And each month, each week, we start to see new solutions come on board. So what happens when we deeply integrate a CMS is we become tied to that CMS and its functionality. And the reason I feel so strongly about it is I was part of the team that acquired Business Catalyst. And Business Catalyst was a CMS with 5 different solutions all in one. And what became challenging is the email campaign that Business Catalyst used had to compete with MailChimp. And the CRM had to compete with, I don't know, I'll make it up badly here for a second. I'm trying to think. Zendesk does some good customer service management. And it's a tall order when you're trying to be an all-in-one solution to stay competitive with all of these open standards. So long story short is I don't believe you do want us to build in a CMS. I encourage you to look at some of our vendors that have deeply integrated their own CMS into Muse. So whether it's, there's a solution, let me just look here real quick. If I go back towards blog, I think it's the best way to see them. But there's one Cookie has their own Muse blog solution, and it's a widget you place in Muse. When you publish to the web, it actually builds out on your hosting platform back-end PHP code so that you have a true CMS on the back end. I believe that Muse Themes is working on the same thing. There's something, I'm forgetting its name, I think it's called Public, P-B-L-I-Q, and forgive me, but this is one of our Muse clients in New York City that's actually seen an opportunity for a blog and has built it out there. There are lots of choices. I guess I challenge you to tell me the feature that you're looking for and challenge our team to come up with a good answer for how you implement it. But I fully believe that allowing us to work, there's another one, Muse Gain has WordPress integration. So you can use Muse to design, in essence, a template that WordPress then will use on its platform. It has all the beauty of Muse, but the back end of that CMS system. So I like the open door. I encourage our team to focus on things that only we can do, and our third-party partners to actually extend that. But you can challenge me on that. So there's the Muse Express blog, which is using WordPress as well. And there it is. This is the one I was trying to think of. It's called publiz.com. And it is both a blogging engine and I think an image showcase bit. Okay, so that was that answer. We're now going to go jump into the app and look at how I can build out a working prototype. So if I look at the site here, as I mentioned, there's a lot going on. There are many, many elements. If I brought out, for example, the layers panel, let me do this. There's going to be a lot. Notice all the layers. There's a whole lot of content in this design. And this is, I think, a beautiful extreme rule of a prototype that's been built. I'm going to start from scratch, as we know. I'm here on my website, and I've gone in and done pretty much nothing. What I want to suggest is there's what I believe is a more common workflow that may occur in your life that makes a lot of sense with Muse and the Creative Cloud and Creative Cloud libraries. And that idea is one that says that if you work in a slightly larger organization, so maybe it's you, yourself, and you have clients that you work with, what I'm showing you is still best practices for you as you work. But I've spent time, before I was on Muse and before I was on Business Catalyst, I was a product manager for the web segment, and I worked on Fireworks. And when Adobe acquired Macromedia, they weren't really they didn't really know what to do with Fireworks. It's kind of like Illustrator, it's kind of like Photoshop. So when Adobe did acquire Macromedia, we established Fireworks as a rapid prototyping tool. And the idea there is that there were many teams that were building out websites or even applications, and those people needed to have working modular components that works well with them. And Fireworks at the time implemented that by way of symbols and libraries, and we've really carried that over into Muse in, I think, a similarly interesting way. But the idea is that, let's say for a moment I'm working with Paul and Jason, and I am the interface designer for our team. But Paul and Jason are responsible for working with their individual engineers and their individual clients to build out a user experience. What my job would be as a designer is to come up with common design elements that I can share in a Creative Cloud library with my team members. I can either give them control over making changes. We can collaborate together if I trust them to build out the library elements. They can fine-tune them based on what they know about their customer needs, and we would share that as a shared collaborative library. If I don't trust them, which is possible, I can also share my library in a read-only mode, and that allows me to control the design, but let them have new instances of that library that they can work with. So let's look at that world a little bit. I do need to give one shout out, and that's the library that I've built is loosely based off of a sample from Muse Themes. They had a template called Hearth, and it's a real estate template. I've taken it and I've built out a Creative Cloud library that I'm going to use to build out my content now. So let me go ahead and open up that CC library, and I'll jump over to it. So it's my wireframe starter. What I'd like to do is actually share it with you guys. So I'm going to go in and share a link to this. I want to show you that share behavior. So if I want to share it, that means that you can have access to it, but you can't make changes. So it has a public link here that I could always go back and take away. But I'm going to go ahead and copy that link onto the clipboard, and then I'm going to jump into my chat. Let's just see, jump here, and I'll push that into the public chat. If you click that link, you can save it for later if you don't want to do it now, but when you click on that link, you're able to join my library and share the source content that I have here. So now that I've shared that up, in theory, you would build that, you would basically link to that and access it from within your Creative Cloud. So here I have CC libraries, and if I come to the drop-down, you can even see how that's happened to me in the past. So I just created this wireframe starter, and I've shared it with everyone. But other designs, let's see the Altura Muse Picnic example, I can see by the little head count that this is a shared library that someone else owns that they've shared with me. As I mentioned, there's two ways of sharing. I can either share a link, or if I trust you, I can collaborate, and then we can both contribute and make changes to an active library together. So what I've done is gone into that design site, that finished example that I liked, and I've saved out individual elements in my Creative Cloud library. And that's what I have in the wireframe starter here. Now I can view these either as a list or as more of a visual set. And I just want to show you a little bit about the magic, back-end magic that Muse offers around theming of components. So what I'm going to do is bring out a couple tabs here. I'm going to grab paragraph styles, go get some graphic styles here. I'll put these guys together. And I'm also going to grab my swatches panel and pull that out. And what you see right now is a whole lot of nothing. So I've got, as we know, this is a brand new file that I created. I just went in and changed the site plan a little bit to add some pages, and I've got no content currently on the site. If I come into the Swatches panel, just to really illustrate this, and I right-click, I can go in and delete all unused colors. Since there's nothing going on their site, there's just the default black, white, and gray colors. So very, very simple world. Now, what happens in Muse is if you take components and you distinctly create paragraph styles for text attributes, graphic styles for CSS things like shadows, fills, gradients, anything of that sort, and then when you save out color swatches, if you don't save them with their value, if instead you save them with a custom name like primary 1, primary 2, background, things of that sort, that name becomes persistent and is independent from the actual color attributes, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do now is when I come to the CC library, I want to grab this first file that I've got there called styles. And I'm just going to drag it onto the canvas and I'm going to release. Now this is where the magic happens. When I bring these elements over, I've named each of the colors in this set. I've also gone in and created different type setting attributes. And I'm using some standard web behaviors here. I've got, for search engine, what would be my H1, or my most primary details on the page. H2, H3, I've got body, spaced, and body regular. So a whole bunch of type styles I know I want to use, and color sets. Now the beauty here is this is just a starting position for me. Now that I've dragged that on the canvas, notice that my paragraph styles have been populated and I have my swatch colors here. I can go ahead and delete these elements off the canvas. They don't need to stay with the project. Those styles will be retained. And if I knew I always wanted to work with this set of styles that I've predefined, I could say File Save As, and always when I open or start anything new, I could start with this project and it would work really well. Now I've got those styles set already. Let's go ahead and, we'll leave them off. I don't need them really. What I want to do is start thinking through, let's say, the landing page of my site. And I have a number of design elements here. I'm going to come in for the first bit and just grab some text and images and drag it onto the canvas. Now, as I'm working, I talked about the idea of responsive design. It really is a huge responsibility as a designer to design for responsive work. And what I would suggest is, as you think of every element in your design, you need to consciously think, how will that manifest on tablets and smartphones? And it needs to be part of your sketches. It needs to be part of your initial thought. It can be part of your widget library, of your Wireframe Creative Cloud library as well. And let me show you a little bit of experimentation with that. I've gone in and I've placed a nice headline. I'm going to go and let's just jump to a brand new page. I'm just going to put it down here and call it test. And this is not, I'll give you the answer and then we'll back up to it. So the wireframing elements I'm giving you do not have breakpoints associated with them. You can add that level of complexity, and I'm going to show you how you do that. But it does bring a whole level of complexity to your design work, and I just kind of want to illustrate that. So I'm going to drag the headline onto the canvas here, onto this page as well. And I've got, oh, what a lovely headline, and it's a 2-column structure, which makes a lot of sense. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and let's say I know that this is what I want on my design, and 960 is a good size here. As I work, I'm going to come in and define the responsive nature of these elements. My logo, I'm fine with it not scaling because it's pretty small. For my headline and the text containers below it, I want those to be fluid in their width, so responsive width. I'll make sure that that's set. And what that means is as I go along here, I can drag the edge of the browser until I get to about the class of a tablet. And when things are looking about right to me visually, I can just drop another breakpoint there. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and make a decision that for tablet, centering my text is pretty awful. So one thing you want to do is make sure that the default is set here in your tool panel to allow you to create custom text attributes per breakpoint. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and left align those columns. Now notice if I go back to desktop, it's still centered. So that typographic change that I made is true only for the desktop or the tablet instance. I'm going to come along again, and when things are starting to look pretty darn crowded in a 2-column structure, I'm going to add that last breakpoint. Now, the rule with your smallest breakpoint is that we're going to use viewport scaling for mobile devices, and it's going to grab this content and it'll scale it smaller for me. I don't really want to go any smaller with 2 columns in my site structure, so I'm just going to come in and select these 2 guys. I'll show you a little bit of magic when you have common containers that you want to scale in a similar way. Notice when I select both of these objects, they as a group have control handles. I could resize the top component or the bottom component, but I also have the ability, if I grab these triangles, to press and drag all of the components to resize them as a group. So just a nice thing that's there that you may not have noticed. But now I have a single structure stack here. The other thing I'll do is for this layout, because it's mobile, I'm going to make the fonts a bit larger so that they're a little more visible. So now what I have is this column structure here for this component that I can work with. Now I'm going to show you another amazing trick that I just discovered that makes me pretty happy. I've defined breakpoints here. And let's say I even put those breakpoints on the master page, and I want to quickly apply the breakpoints to an individual page. Here's the magic. Grab any object that happens to be on a page with multiple breakpoints and just copy it. If I come out now to, let's say, the About Us page, and I know I want to carry over those breakpoints, when I paste it, if I come under Edit to Paste, notice that I can say Paste and Create Breakpoints. It's going to bring over the exact breakpoints from the page where this item came from. I can delete it now. That's just a lazy man's way to apply breakpoints really easily to a totally different page. All right, so we're back on this page, and I've got my design pretty well set. I've gone in and created individual breakpoints for this component. I can now come into this object, if I select it, and go to my Creative Cloud library. I want to create a new one, and we'll just go ahead and give it a little simple name here. So I'm just going to call it, I have to click on the name and not the item. So I'm going to just call this Test Dani and hit Return. Now when I go to that other page, because I've defined breakpoints, and this site, this individual page has those breakpoints already set, when I come on over and drag this object onto the canvas and pull it into place, Muse is it's got to guess a little bit, so you have to be kind to it. We're visually designing responsive websites, and we have to make some guesses when you have multiple breakpoints. But notice that it brought over not only that component, but each of the breakpoint layouts that I defined. I can do that in my library, but there's a rule that says that the page you're dragging it to has to already have those breakpoints set. So you need to kind of fiddle with that a little bit to make that happen. Okay, back on my site plan, and we're building out our site. So we're going to focus on what I think is best practice, which is start with your largest or your smallest breakpoint, flesh it out fully, then come in once all your elements are on the page and add additional breakpoints. Anything you do once you've added breakpoints has to be checked across every breakpoint. So it really adds a lot of time when you're experimenting. You want to hold off on adding breakpoints as long as you can. So I've got my headline bit. I'm going to have a little call to action button here, and I'll drag that on the canvas. Now I want to point out there's different ways to bring elements into a library using the Creative Cloud libraries. When I press and drag an instance of a component, it is linking that object such that if I had 2 buttons, let's say, on the page, and I made a change, if this source was Illustrator and I changed the color, it would link to the project and it will update all instances if I pressed and dragged it on the canvas. If instead I right-click and say I want to place a copy and release, that is going to not be tied to the linked instance or the source if that were Illustrator, for example. It's going to be its own unique copy. It's not linked and it will not dynamically update. All right, I'm going to keep going. I've got that one little headline bit. I want to add a nice photo gallery set here. So I'm going to press and drag that on the canvas. You'll notice I'm dragging a little high and staying away from the footer. If you drag too low, it ends up being a footer, and when that footer checkbox is checked, It's going to stay at the bottom of the page no matter what you do in the design. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room here and just get my objects on the canvas. So what these are is standard web stuff or standard Muse stuff. There's no widget here that isn't built into Muse. This is a really nice example of an accordion, not accordion. It's known as a composition widget or a trigger target. And as I click between two panels, I have totally different content on the first panel and the second panel. So it's a nice way to show a lot of information in a really limited way. This could be 12 dots, and I could use this previous and next button to page between the 12 sections. I'm going to keep going and grab another text container here and get in on the, notice that I dragged it a little low, and it, oddly enough, thinks that it's a footer. Maybe, no, maybe not, just needed a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and drag one and then a second instance of this guy, do a little side-by-side work, and let's go ahead and finish it off with a little bit of a footer. So I'll come in and just create a container here at the bottom, and I will define it as a footer in a second, but I'm going to place that container. I'm going to go ahead and fill with one of those named colors, that background gray, and I'll define it to be stretched browser width. And then I've got some footer stuff here that I want to bring over. I grab this guy, drag it onto the canvas, and then move it into position. If I select appropriately, drag that guy into position here, and I'll reduce the size of my footer. Now, footers are really powerful across multiple pages if they're defined on the master. I'll go ahead and set it as a footer, which is going to keep it there towards the bottom of the site. So I'm going to leave it alone for now. So I've got some elements here. Let's just bring over one more, which is going to be some social icons. And I'm just going to kind of stick them towards the top. This is sort of every social icon imaginable, so I don't want all of them. Let's say I just want the first row, and I'm going to go ahead and place those over on the side. So in the spirit of wireframing, I may have a client, this Hearth coffee company, and I'm doing a variation of their existing design. I might have a totally different client with different fonts, different logos, and different colors. What I would argue is you still want to use this really well-structured content source because it's very easy to then go in and build out variations. Let's get these panels off to the side a little bit for me, but I want to keep an eye on them. What I have now is, as we know, we saw it in that first example, fonts and colors associated with this particular project. Now, if I click on any one item, let's say I grab the I'm a button item, I can dissect it. You'll notice it has a color that's been assigned from the swatch set. It has states, so there's a normal, over, down, and active state that's inherent in that button. It's all well designed. But when I did the work, I was specifically conscious about using swatches with named colors and text objects that had paragraph or graphic styles. So let's say I'm working now on a very different site, and I want to wireframe it with its own unique look and feel. Or more importantly, this may be the look and feel of my wireframe, but it doesn't look like the brand of my client. When my client signs off on this nice, simple, interactive site with very simple colors and images, I can go back and change the content to update to look like my client by easily skinning some of these swatches and styles that I've defined. So I've got, oh, what a lovely headline. And let's assume for a moment, instead of Ubuntu Lite, I want to go get a different typekit font. I'm going to go into the Add Web Fonts area here. If I can do that without stuttering. Let's try that again. So with this object selected, type T on the keyboard. I'm going to go down and scroll to the area where I can add web fonts. And I can go into the typekit space. And I may not know what font I want to use. Maybe I don't have a corporate identity already set. I can come into the filter and say, I really like slab fonts, and I want something that looks good, both in headline and body, and has enough weights to it. So Adele condensed might be a really good design for me. I'm going to go ahead and check it, and then I'll click OK. And Typekit will now download the 14 fonts that I just selected from that family. Now, from a weight standpoint, I don't have to use all 14 fonts. If I only use 2 weights in my project, the typekit kit that's generated will know to only upload those 2 weights. So don't be afraid if a family has 14 weights and you only want a few of them. It will only include in the project the weights that you actually use in the project. So now that I have that loaded, I can go to that lovely headline. If I can remember which font that was, let's say Acumen. It might have not been, but it'll do the job. So Acumen, I think it was Adele. We'll stick with the program. So Adele, and I'm going to go ahead and select a semi-bold weight for that lovely headline. And that looks pretty good to me. For my body text, I may also want to change that out. So I'm going to pick out something that's a little nicer for body text for this particular project. It's already Ubuntu, so jeepers. Let's go with Open Sans in a regular weight. So I'm coming through and making changes to the styles that have been already defined. Now, interestingly enough, the way this manifests, if you know InDesign, it's a similar metaphor, but that "oh, what a lovely headline," I can roll over that paragraph style in my paragraph styles panel and notice that it's using the standard style, but the typeface has been changed. It's now an Adele condensed semi-bold font. Because it's based on the original paragraph style, certain attributes like the point size of 36 are being pulled from that paragraph style. I can make changes to a style, and it's going to remember the parent style, which is really good depending on how complex your site design is. If I want what I've just done to propagate everything on the site, what I can do is right-click on that paragraph style and say, instead of clearing out all the exceptions that I've created, go ahead and redefine the current selected object to be the style for the site. Now, if I had that headline anywhere else here on the page, you would see that headline change. I'll show you the magic, though. If I go back to my Creative Cloud libraries, let's just grab that same block of text that is still the same in the library, but when I come and place it on the canvas, isn't that funny? It doesn't want to be non-footer at first. Come with me. It's because I never set this as a footer. That was a little note to myself. Notice that the headline is using the new font. So as I drag it on the canvas, it's going to map swatch colors. It's going to map the names of paragraph and graphic styles, and it will update for any changes I've made. Here's some real magic. If I come into the swatches panel, close this guy out again, and I decide that I want to change the colors, so that shade of green is wrong. I can come into the swatches options. Notice important here, it's not named with the color value, it has a custom name. That allows me to come in and say, you know what, I think this lovely shade of purple is much more impactful. I click OK, and notice that it changed all instances of that green to be purple. It is now the primary color. That's pretty scary, but we'll leave it there for now. The other bit is if we look at these social icons, there's different ways you can work with icons. These are PNG files. And as a PNG, they have an advantage within Muse of being able to be colorized really easily if they're a small object. Let's say I go in and place, I just want to find something really quick that's an icon. So you notice I've got a bunch of social icons here, and they're PNG files. I'll just come in and grab one, let's say Dribble or Tumblr. I don't know, Vimeo, fine. I'm going to take the Vimeo PNG file and I'm going to place it on the canvas. If I want to colorize it using one of the standard colors, there's a bit of a trick here. So I can come under Effects. I'm going to go to the Glow. I'm going to click it. I'm going to select the color I want to apply. Let's say I want to apply that beautiful purple color. From an opacity standpoint, I'm going to set it to 100. For the blur, I think I can max it out to 250 or 300. I set it at 300 and it rolled me back to 250. And then the magic is define it as an inner glow. What that will do is automatically colorize that object with the swatch color that I have. If I change that back to green, that Vimeo place content will change as well. So as I work, I can come in and take a stock set of examples. If we kind of roll this back for a minute to our original story, I'm the visual designer. Paul and Jason are the interaction designers. they know that for their client, they need a different font, they need different colors. They can still leverage my library in the Creative Cloud and go in and create their own paragraph and graphic styles. What they would do, I'm just going to take this home a little bit more, is remember how all these styles are contained here. Let's say that Jason really likes his fonts and his purple color. What he can do, same as we did before, he can delete everything in this project, make it empty, knowing that he saved everything as a style. When he opens his new project each morning, he'll start with an empty version of this content, and any library item he pulls over from my Creative Cloud library will inherit his fonts and colors. All right, at this point, what I could do is go ahead and publish that out to the web, create a temporary site, share it with my client, let them interact with elements, and we'll start to iterate before we flesh out the design even further. Looks like I've got one question that I've already answered it. So I'm going to say I answered that one live. And then we've had one other. All right, kind of quiet crowd there for at least Q&As. Are there any other questions that either the moderators that have been helping me want to throw into the Q&A? I can bring up chat. It's kind of funny because I don't think with this tool y'all are seeing everything I'm seeing, which is kind of nice. It's safe to look at chat again. So Bob Faulkner is saying that the color swatch has to have a custom name. That is not true. And Paul is reminding me. So let's just try that for a minute. Maybe I am wrong. I am under the impression, as he notes for over a year, that if I came to Oh What a Lovely Headline and I decided I wanted to give it a custom color, let's pick something we're not really using, a beautiful shade of orange, and I save it. This is name with color value, right? So it's using the values that I have defined in my color wheel. If I click OK, and I decide to change that interpretation, so let's go on in here, and I say I am a button, and the I am a button I want to fill with my beautiful named, not named, this is dynamically named, so it's not a custom name, it's a value name, I am a button. If I now go in and change that swatch, so I go to swatch options, and I decide that this named color value should be green, and click OK, I guess you're right. So he's right and I'm wrong, and that's why it's a jam session. You win. Thank you for that feedback. So even if it's not with a name, if it's simply a color value, any item that is using that swatch will automatically adjust to the new color value. So thank you for that tip. I appreciate it. I'm going to go back to chat and see if there's any other gems there. We've got just a little bit more time. All right, Bob, got your point. And all right, we'll wait just a little bit longer if there's other questions that folks have. I am going to go ahead. We've got one more polling question. I'll go ahead and throw this one up. Just feedback on the session. Did this meet your requirements? We're using a new tool. You're welcome to throw into the chat your thoughts about the new tool that we are using. As I mentioned, there's a lot of advantages on our end where it's just easier from a recording standpoint. The quality, I think, is better. Polling seems to be pretty good. I appreciate y'all being our first pancake, as it says. And the recordings will be up there. As usual, if you say that I fell short of expectations, you owe me an answer in the chat as to why. But it looks like most folks are pretty pleased with the session that we have today. So once again, you've spent another beautiful hour with the Muse team. Thank you for being here. If you have thoughts about jam sessions you'd like to see, you can go ahead and throw those into the chat. We will, I haven't picked what we're going to do in 2 weeks yet. I'll probably pull something out of the archives. This is Muse Jam Session recording 177, so there's a lot of topics to pull from. We're going to go ahead and end at this point. And Claudia says the sound is better, good to hear. I'll stop the recording. And folks, we hope to see you again here in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for your time. Keep using the sites. Keep sending us site of the days. Join our private beta. Let us know what your thoughts are. And thanks for being part of the Muse community.